The House of Representatives is still effectively out of business since Republicans decided to kick out Speaker Kevin McCarthy with no plan to replace him. With the escalating Israel-Hamas war now into a fifth day, Republicans say they want to support Israel, if only they could move anything through their speakerless House, leaving the Chaos Caucus scrambling to get in line behind a candidate, any candidate, as crises pile up. Reminder, we are also just 37 days away from government shutdown crisis number 2. Republicans got a tiny bit closer to selecting a new speaker today. They're choosing between current House Majority Leader Steve Scalise and Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan. That would be Steve Scalise, who once told a reporter he was like his fellow Louisianan David Duke, but without the baggage. And Jim Jordan, who sexual assault victims allege turned a blind eye to abuse as their wrestling coach at by their Ohio State wrestling coach. And they say that he has no business being speaker. That was, of course, long before Jordan ignored congressional subpoenas and asked Donald Trump for a pardon. Both Scalise and Jordan voted against certifying President Biden's victory in 2020. But the louder of the two insurrectionists, Jordan, is Donald Trump's pick for speaker, as, by the way, Kevin McCarthy once was. During a private forum on Tuesday, both Scalise and Jordan refused to answer a direct question from normie conservative Colorado Congressman Ken Buck about whether President Biden was duly elected in 2020, an answer that he said is required to get him off the fence. In a closed-door vote today, House Republicans voted 113 to 99 to nominate David Duke without the baggage over Trump's MAGA pardon friend. But 113 is a long way from the 217 votes needed to get elected Speaker on the House floor. So in the meantime, the House will remain speakerless and in recess because the Chaos Caucus will not bring up a nominee who doesn't have the votes. And it's unclear when a floor vote for Speaker will actually happen. Joining me now is NBC News senior Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Haake. So, Garrett, what is the status of the negotiations to get someone closer to 217?
Well, Joy, there won't be a speaker tonight. The House has just recessed until noon tomorrow. Steve Scalise is still in the building. I'm seeing some reporters down the hall still waiting outside the speaker's office that either he or Kevin McCarthy or Patrick McHenry have been kind of cycling in and out of for the last week, trying to figure out how to get him a little bit closer to that 217 number. Now, Scalise is probably in the neighborhood of around 200 Republican votes. Jim Jordan has said he is backing him, will nominate him on the floor. He's urged his followers to support him. So a lot of votes will come with that. But there are House Republicans who are all over the map here with different issues with Scalise. Some see him as too much of the status quo. Some don't like that he doesn't appear to have a plan on averting the shutdown in a way that it makes House conservatives happy. Some, Nancy Mace by name, upset about the David Duke comment from years past, saying she could not support him and explain that vote to her voters back in South Carolina. So he's got a difficult problem here. I don't know that it's an intractable one, but the longer this stays unsolved and not on the floor, one House Republican expressed to me, the more likely it is that more people will come up with more complaints and more things to ask him for, which just makes this more complicated and more likely to drag out even longer, Joy.
What a mess. NBC's Garrett Haake, thank you very much. Let's bring in, cheers, MSNBC political analyst David Jolly, a former Republican congressman from Florida who's, for whatever reason, no longer affiliated with the party. I cannot come up with why. Okay, I was not a math major. I was visual environmental studies. So I will just but I did a little quickie math. And if Scalise were to be able to get all of Jim Jordan's 99, that would put him at 212, which would leave him 5 short of 217, if my math is on point. What to do? Because if they can't bring over some of the maybes or some of those who will not vote for any reason for Scalise, they're going to have to go to Democrats, right? Like, isn't that the only way out?
Yeah, which they will be unwilling to do. I mean, this is deja vu all over again, Joy. We saw it in January with Kevin McCarthy's 15 votes. We saw it a couple of weeks ago when they deposed of Kevin McCarthy. And so now you have Steve Scalise trying to get to the magic number, and he appears to come up short. The one thing that I am looking for is not actually the grandstanders, if you will, the Nancy Mason are over, because they actually have fairly weak spines. Like, they would probably cave and end up voting for Scalise on a second, third, fourth ballot. I'm more intrigued by the Thomas Massie, who says, hey, Scalise doesn't have a plan for the budget or the CR, or Ken Buck, who says Scalise won't answer if the election was stolen or not in 2020. Those are new players in this mix. And because you're only talking about 3 or 4 votes that could sink Scalise, those people now who were not part of the previous cycles of withholding votes for McCarthy, those members now come into play.
Let me play Ken Buck because I thought he was very interesting. He was on MSNBC earlier today with Katie Tur. Take a listen.
I have 3 issues that I want to know about. I asked last night, will you unequivocally and publicly state that the election, the 2020 presidential election, was not stolen? He didn't answer that question very clearly, and Jim Jordan didn't answer that question very clearly. The second issue I have is what is the spending number that we're all going to agree on? It doesn't have to be my number, but I think if we're going to go and move forward with appropriations bills, we need to know what that number is. And the third question I had is, will you put Ukraine funding on the floor?
Oh my God, like a Republican from like the 90s. I feel like I'm back in the 90s. He's so normal. I'm like, bring that kind of guy back. But so that's him, right? He sounds totally normal. I probably don't agree with his politics, but he sounds like a normal human being. But he's up against this. Can I put this up? Nancy Mace. She came in wearing a scarlet letter shirt. That's not serious. And then you have this woman named Harriet Hageman, who, by the way, is who replaced Liz Cheney in Wyoming. She walked in carrying a lasso. The incentives, the political incentives, David, are for that kind of shenanigans, not for the norminess Ken Buck showed. How do they solve this problem when the people carrying the lasso are probably the deciders?
That's right, Joy. The one thing I'll tell you Republicans are good at are publicly punching themselves in the face. I mean, the fact that they're going to take all of this nonsense onto the House floor again after the nation went through seeing this before is crazy, which then goes to why the members like Buck and Massey and others really come into play.
Yes.
We know the craziness of Nancy Mace and others, right? But now consider Scalise will be short on votes over issues like Ukraine, Israel, budget, the stolen election, actually issues that hurt Republicans to be highlighted. And so this is where there is a coming disaster that they could have avoided. They could have required 217 votes behind closed doors before they ever went to the House floor. They didn't. And the sad part here, it almost seems insignificant, the palace intrigue on the Hill, when we're seeing what's playing out in the Middle East and Israel. Now we have a nation here domestically with a dysfunctional Congress, with ambassadors who haven't filled positions, and military leadership being withheld because Republicans keep punching themselves in the face publicly and can't get their act together.